Howdy. Welcome back to Dion Talk. Dana, the CEO of Hemling, will be joining us shortly. What changed between landlords and tenants because of COVID? Which you're not allowed to say on YouTube, but you know what I'm talking about. Since around 2020, some significant things have changed. And apparently my email didn't go to the right place. So let me send it again. Get her in here with us. There have been some significant changes that are obvious and some that are a little more subtle. Some that I've talked about that have made it possible for me to get my last few deals. And have drastically impacted my rents. There we are. Hopefully I got it sent to the right email finally.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry about that.
It's
It
all
was
good.
one of those back-to-back days, so I wasn't even checking my email. I was like, oh no, I don't see it. So I apologize for the 2-minute delay here.
No worries. So before you say anything that gets us sued, we are live on YouTube.
Oh, perfect.
There
Okay.
you go.
Well, hi everyone. I apologize for my 2-minute delay there.
That's all good. Um, I was just going over some of the changes that are happening well, online, in person, because of the changes from what happened in 2020. Some of those words that we don't
Yeah.
say because it stops your video from getting spread to new people because they don't like you talking about things that spread. But I have a list of a few things that have definitely changed in like for my specific situation because of the pandemic in 2020 and what's going on since then. But today we have Dana, the CEO of Hemlane, who has a larger mountain of information than I do from my personal experience. So I figured we could both share some of the things that we've seen changing because of what happened in 2020. So if you like, I'll start with my first one.
Yes, I would love your first one. And I've got a list of them as well from our data and observations.
Nice. So for me, and this is the one that I think I've tried to relate in several videos because I just have my own personal experience, but it seemed like at that specific time, risk shifted more to the landlord side. When you have eviction moratoriums, rent freezes, people don't have to pay their rent, you can't kick them out. The first time the CARES Act came out, landlords couldn't apply for the rent relief. The tenant had to, and they had to prove that they were impacted. And there were a lot of people who just weren't paying their rent, even though they were getting paid still and still working. So, because of the increased level of risk, several things changed as a landlord. Increased reserves, tighter screening criteria, all of those things that say there was always risk in being a landlord, but now most governments are combative towards being a landlord. So here's how I mitigate those risks.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that eviction moratorium one you mentioned. However, I have a different take on it. I think that that led to, so that risk shift you spoke about, I think it's now even getting more difficult to become a landlord because having these eviction moratoriums in place almost made it where governments, like the states, were like, great, we can go ahead and add more rent control. We can go ahead and add these additional laws in because landlords were able to deal with it when we told them there was a ban on evictions in certain areas. You couldn't charge late fees. There were all sorts of, that was up in Seattle near your neck of the woods. There were so many different laws that came out that I was hoping that they would relax and they would say, you know what, let's just let the free market work here and all of that. But it's actually been quite different where there's still continued more regulations going in place, which I think is really interesting. So just something I wanted to bring up because I was hoping that laws would get relaxed and you wouldn't need a law degree to understand tenant landlord law, not only for the landlord, but the tenant themselves. And now I feel like there's just so many constant things coming out every single day that makes it more challenging in the business to navigate, and making sure your lease is up to date and all those kinds of things as well.
So I recently, like literally this morning or yesterday, finished my book. So I'm writing a book, Financial Freedom for the Lazy Person. It is done as going off to Michael Zuber's editing team to be torn apart, probably, but because I write
Awesome.
like a 5-year old with brain damage. But uh, a couple of the sections in the book are why I prefer a blue state over a red state because of that
Mhm.
extra layer of regulation limits the competition, how rent control forces rent increases, how it's, appreciation happens where it's harder to get the permits. And I believe I totally agree. Since 2020, you would think, okay, so we went so far with the pendulum that you couldn't pay rent and you couldn't get evicted, that, common sense would come back and say, hey, this is a business. People have to run it like a business. And no, since then, rent control has passed in Washington. It just went in June 1st. So the laws are
Mhm.
continuing to go that way. Part of the rent control bill, I think, is your late fees can be a total of $20. Like take away all of the power
That's,
of encouragement to
yeah,
pay your rent on time. So another thing that's definitely changed since 2020 is tenant awareness.
yeah,
The social media feeds that, the channels that took off during the landlords are evil, tenants are the victims, housing is a right. If you can't work, you can't lose your house, has spiraled into YouTube channels that get a ton of views because they talk about how renters can work the system, how to find, which is good, how to find the assistance in your area, but a lot of it is misleading. A lot of it makes people think, I'm a tenant, I have all the rights. And while tenants have
yeah.
rights, so do the landlords. So I think, well, it's harder to get into the business to be a landlord now. It's also more important now that that the owner educate themselves. So you're at least as educated as your tenants are.
Yeah, you don't want them to ever as outschool you and say, actually, the law says this because you, from that perspective, look like a newbie. So I totally agree on that one. Now, one of the things, Dion, that I think with obviously the eviction moratoriums and stuff, one of the things that I think was a positive, which I pulled some numbers on, just to confirm my assumptions, this was on government assistance. And so if you look at government assistance programs, and this is Section 8, but then there's also local ones I want to talk about, there was a huge surge during COVID where there was $25 billion in December of 2020 for rental assistance programs to help tenants pay rent, and then another 21.5 billion in 2021. So that surged. And so the question that stay in place, what happened with government assistance programs post the pandemic, and were we able to continue to fund that, especially for those who think of, Section 8 housing, or they cater to that. And so actually what we saw was programs went back to the pre-COVID levels, for government assistance. However, there were certain things that actually we benefited from with it. And so some of those were like, faster dispersions of the aid. So like digital and technology to help transmit that automation, because they had so much during COVID that they had to beef up their systems, which was great. And then just expanded eligibility, for some of the local programs. And so we've seen that where there's, new housing assistance programs that were spurred up in certain places because of COVID. So with the eviction moratorium, there's some good news for landlords, I think that comes from it.
Yeah, there were definitely some shifts in the landlord's favor. When that it was like 46 billion something total that came out, those two
Yeah,
packages that came out. Originally, the tenants had to apply, they had to prove they were impacted. They reversed that and they said landlords can apply. Nobody has to prove you're impacted. You can be audited, and if you were still collecting rent, you could get in trouble, right? And like the IEDL
yeah,
grants that got all the fraud in it too. So, you're right with a lot more. online presence. This is one of the other big shifts from landlords and tenants. We, for the first time as grown-ups, experienced everyone around us having cooties. You couldn't get within 6 feet of people. At a restaurant, germs would only spread if you were walking around, so you had to have the mask. But once you sat down, you were in a safe zone. Stores put
Yeah.
arrows on the ground so that you went the right direction when you were shopping up and down the aisles. Like all of these things that just seem like really subtle things shifted mentality from for a lot of people resistant to technology going, I'll pay online through a portal as long as I don't have to meet my landlord and give them a check. I'll uh, submit this thing online as long as I don't have to have a in-person conversation with my landlord. So yeah, there's a lot more online resources, which is actually one of the reasons why I went with my new properties that I've acquired since 2020. I acquired one at the end of 2020, one in 2021, and then one in 2023. Um, Four of those units are on the Hemlane platform because they're new tenants or I had tenant turnover online with a portal, not in person. People ready, like everything's online. Of course, you could do this since 2020. There has to be some way to do this without meeting people in person. And to me, that is a huge benefit because while
Yep.
I don't mind meeting people and talking in person, I'm much more better online, virtually, or through text messages. Uh, Not dealing with people face to face is much better for me personally. So I kind of appreciate that.
Yeah, no, the spur of technology for us at least. But when COVID first hit, and they shut down San Francisco. We were one of the first cities to shut down. I had an investor call and said, pull all your requisitions, close every open position you have. You guys are going to have to go into hibernation mode. And it was quite the opposite. It was some of our best years of growth because of that, of landlords saying, hey, I want to do everything digitally. I don't want to be in person, and tenants preferring that as well. So we definitely saw that. And I was like, hey, I should have left those requisitions open. I should make sure that we have a good team in place. So yeah.
And so this is one where people really need to pay attention to the changes that are happening because of 2020 and understand that real estate is local. This one can
Mhm.
impact you positively like it did me, or some people might be hit negatively by this. This is the
Yeah.
biggest change that I've talked about the most as far as finding my last two deals and the deal that I'm probably going to get later this year. Remote work. This is such a game changer. Most of my life, I knew one or two people who worked remotely. 20, 30 years ago, I don't know if I knew any. I might have known mail scam things where you can stuff letters from your house or something. But since 2020, it's people say the statistic has gone down now. 56% of people are required to work in the office in person.
Okay.
That means 44% don't. That's a
Yeah.
huge number from one or two to maybe 3% to now above 40% of the people can work a remote job. My specific strategy was to purchase outside of the major work hubs. So I don't own inside the cities. I say my portfolio is between Olympia and Tacoma and Washington, but not in Olympia or Tacoma and Washington. So I'm a little more
Hmm.
rural. Now that remote work is an option, people don't have to live where the work is. The rents in my market spiked up 30 to 40%. That doesn't mean they went up 30 to 40% all over the country because the people were moving from the congested city areas where they had to be for the work to the more rural
Yeah.
areas. I've made several videos on this is how I found my deals because the prices haven't pushed up because remote workers might not want to buy. What if they get called back to the office next year? But they might not want to live in the city, so they've pushed out, which increased demand pretty much in a period of 4 years, doubled my rent. There were years where it went up 30 to 40% each year. So finding the deals, it was easier to find the last two deals because the rents went up, but the prices didn't. But what this has done to my entire portfolio, since I targeted rural areas, all rents are up significantly. Now, if I had been in the city, this is where I'll go to the data that you have, or maybe somebody that's watching, put it in the comments. What about the people who used to rent an apartment in the city? With all of the amenities, pay $3,000 or $4,000 a month for 1,200 square feet that can now move out to the rural areas where I was getting $1,200 a month. I'm now getting $2,300 a month. And people think it's a good deal because they're remote workers from the city where that is significantly less than what they were paying. But it's making me a ton of money.
Yeah. Dion, I love that one because even if you are 1 day of the week in the office or 2 days a week, you can still be in more rural areas, and not doing 5 days of a week of 2 hour commute doesn't seem like so much. I want to do a video after everyone has self-driving cars because I think that's the other thing that's going to even further spur people living outside of the central city, because transportation is people always talk about real estate in cities as, we need to build more housing. We need to build more housing. If you actually look at studies, transportation is one of the biggest things that makes it really challenging from an economic perspective for people to get to and from work. And so I love that one because it's so true. And it probably actually frees up, and it reduced rental rates in cities, right? And so once it did that, it kind of actually freed it up for more affordability for those who may have to be, in the city 5 days of the week because they're a server at a restaurant or something like that. So I absolutely love that one. And I'm sure you were thinking before COVID that that was going to happen, and that's why you invested there, right?
No, I did that because cities scare me. This is a law enforcement mentality that out of every 100 people, there's one psychotic person and two or three sociopathic people. And in a city, there's just more groups of 100. So I've
Yeah,
literally invested outside of the larger populations just as an accidental byproduct. Rents went up because of remote work. I
yeah.
don't think I ever expected that to increase as much it is as it has. I think the next step, if let's say this is an entire another video, but AI replaces the significant, enough jobs to where universal basic income or Section 8 becomes a more acceptable thing. I think in that same situation, people are going to prefer to live in rural areas instead of cities because of the congestion, because of the increased costs of other things. Uh, so I think it's a weird positioning that I've done where I don't want to own. Also, well, I want to own in a blue state. I don't want to own in a blue town. There's a difference,
Mhm.
right? The blue state has restrictions on building. It has more tenant favorable laws, but the blue cities seem to want to implode with crazy laws
Yeah,
that makes it impossible to run a business. So that's been a part of it too.
yeah, yeah,
Do you have any
yeah.
more major shifts since 2020?
My next one is payment plans. I've never had so many tenants ask about payment plans, and our evictions team hasn't seen that as well. But I think a lot of tenants got used to, oh, my landlord can accommodate things and put me on a payment plan. And so now some are recommending it. They're like, hey, I can't pay my rent on the first of the month. Can you give me a payment plan? And it's the most interesting thing because we never had that pre-COVID, and now suddenly we get that quite frequently. So that's another interesting one that I have, again, with the eviction moratorium and stuff like that. I think there was quite a lot of that.
Yeah, I would have to wonder if that's a cause of 2020 or something I've only experienced since 2020. But up until 2020, all of my tenants paid in one rent payment. Some
Mhm.
paid on we make it due on the 5th because they get their Social Security on the 3rd or we whatever. But I have several tenants now in the last few years where their rent is paid in two payments. And
Yeah.
I don't know if I could associate that with 2020, but I've only seen it since then. So I'm gonna have to do some research and figure out why.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. The weekly payments is something I'm also a fan of. If someone gets weekly paychecks, make sure you can keep them on schedule so the first of the month isn't a surprise. Cool. What do you have other ones for me, Dion?
No,
I
I
loved
think
your last one.
that was the ones that I have. What we're going to do next is get into the questions in the chat, but I'm also going to stop
Cool.
recording this because this will be released as a separate video if people want to see the questions that came up in the chat, because there are some good ones, and to hear what our responses were. And you're watching this in Futureland, you're going to have to go back to the live stream that came out on Tuesday, the 8th, to watch the questions.
Cool.
Cool. Uh, I always like these live streams. They go as long as the questions do, so I appreciate it when people
Great.
put in questions. A couple of things really quick before we get into the questions. Tonight there's a course call at 6. So if you're on the course, I'd like to see you there. Cody Davis is joining us. So have your questions ready for Cody because he always comes with more information than I can handle. I have to take notes. And this Thursday, so I'm going to put a link in the comments. But this Thursday at 9 a.m., I'm doing a live stream. It's a webinar for BiggerPockets that you have to register to see. If you can't make it live and to the webinar, if you register for it, they'll send you a copy. And if anybody's going to BPCon in the webinar, I'm giving away a code that I have to give away in the webinar because that's the only place it counts to get $100 off of going to BPCon in October. If you register and can't make it, they send you the recording, which will have the code in it. So I just wanted to cover that first. And then we'll get to the questions. Howdy, everybody. People from all over. Jupiter, Florida, is that a real place? Question for Dana
It
from
is.
Curtis. It is a real place? Yeah, it sounds like a
Okay.
real place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can someone be an owner on Hemlane and an agent for Hemlane?
Yeah. We have plenty of owners who are agents on the platform. We actually prefer it because you know how it works yourself as an owner. And you also understand, like when we connect you with other owners in your region, you can empathize with them and be like, I know exactly how one Hemlane works. And then like two, I'm an owner as well. And I understand exactly what you're looking for. So we actually prefer it. Actually our top performing agents are also ones that manage their own properties on the platform. Yeah.
Nice. That's a good to know. Cody, who's going to be in the course call tonight, has a bit over 100 units and he let go a property manager on some of his, and he's going to transition over to self-managing on Hemlane. And depending on how the next couple of months go, he might scale that up more through more of his. And so far, he seems pretty excited about it. I think I sent you
I
text
love it.
messages he was sending me where uh, he's younger, so maybe the technology shift is easier for him. Uh, but
Don't
it'd be good to
worry,
get his.
Dion, you're very tech savvy too. You're very tech savvy too.
No, I've had zero issues with it. But I know I have tenants that are probably a little more resistant to it. Spencer, howdy, says, me again, would you buy a duplex that breaks even after CapEx with 5% down would be a 9% cash on cash return with 20% down? Doing some first time home buyer shenanigans with my fiance. So good luck with that. Um, so this is the math question that usually comes up. Have you ever done a house hack, Dana?
No, but my roommate house hacked. So she bought the place and then I was her renter in the place when
There you
I
go.
was like, 21. Yeah.
Okay, so Spencer, the way there's a video on my channel called "How I Run the Numbers on the House Hack." It's actually a section in the actionable
Ah,
lessons in the book. And the two things I do, I remove myself from the equation. You said it would break even while you lived there. That's not how I run it. Take yourself out of the equation. If every unit was rented out, so if you're living on one side of a duplex and both sides were rented out at current rents, what would that yield look like? You said it was a 9% return with a 20% down. So if that 9% is with you living there, it's probably more if it was rented out. If the 9% is with you living there and it's 20% down, how does that compare to other deals in your market? Because that's what you're trying to do. You're not trying to figure out how much you make. You're
yeah.
trying to say, of these 5 properties I'm looking at, which is the best one? And then I'll follow up with this. And this is not a critique. This is me pointing out that almost every time I get the question, is this a deal or is this a bad deal? You share the math. And it's not you, Spencer. It's everyone who asked the question. This is my
Yeah.
return. Should I buy it? Is there enough parking? Are there washer dryer hookups? Is it a safe enough market to live in? Is it in a flood zone? Do you have pet friendly fenced yards? Like this entire list of criteria that determines a deal is good or bad. Math is a part of it, and you want to make sure you get it right. It's a very important part of it, but it's one thing out of all of these other things. I've got one video on here that's for members only, but every month we do 2 members only things where we analyze a deal. It takes about 45 minutes to look at a deal, which in action would be 3 minutes. In practice to learn the skill, it's 45 minutes. Math takes up about five. Out of 45 minutes, 5 minutes is determining if the math is good or bad. So it's a good question. I can't tell you from just the math because I don't know your market, if it's area or, above area average or below. But how's everything else on that deal look like? Duplex Dave, question for Dana. I have been generating all my FL off the financial list. I'll have to figure out what the acronym is. Specific Florida specific leases. There you go. I can read.
Ah,
That's why I was
yeah.
struggled to narrate a book through Rocket Lawyer. Can the leases now be generated through Hemlane with comparable legal terms, requirements, and addendum capability?
Yes, we have all the leases in app. So we've gone through their state specific, but also county specific in certain regions. And yes, so we have all of that in app. And if you want to look at those and review those, you can. You can also edit the template, so you can add other things in there. We made them exceptionally concrete. So everything from like requiring renters insurance, 100,000 that we put on there, et cetera. Like we really went through every single term. And then you also have the addenda in there and disclosures, but you can add your own as well. So like the lead-based paint and things like that will automatically be included. You always have the pamphlet, the actual disclosure if it's built before 1978 or in 1978 or before. So yeah, we have all of that stuff in app for you to review, and you won't have to go to a third party to look and create one. You can generate everything online.
Love it. The lease is one of the hardest things when you're brand new. It's this scary
Mhm.
document. Once you've done enough and you know that yours covers everything you need, it's almost like money. When you don't have enough, it's the only thing. And once you have enough, it's just a thing. When you don't have your
Yeah.
lease and you're not confident in it, it's this big, scary monster. And then once you have it and you've signed several of them and you know it covers what you need it to, it's just a footnote.
Yeah.
Julie says, howdy, Dana. If a property owner called your company saying that your platform was being used for money laundering, would you look into it or just brush it off?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Fraud and the security detection, we have a team that does that. We actually take it very seriously. As you can imagine, we have a ton of people. This weekend, I think we had 1,000 signups that were fraudulent accounts. We have a team that shuts them down right away. You don't know it. We're doing in the background as you're in the platform, understanding your behavior, who you are, and any higher level accounts or like high risk accounts will shut down, and we'll be monitoring all of that. So if there's anything like that of money laundering, I'd be surprised if it got through our system because of the security checks that we put in place. But if there is that, I would definitely forward that over to our security team right away.
Yeah, Julie is dealing with something with a previous property manager that was using Rentec and had issues with the property
Mm.
manager.
Yeah.
My,
Oh, well, that's oh, sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Go for it. Okay. So actually that is one thing that if you are a property management partner of ours, we've actually seen that way too often on other platforms where they hold funds or they've used like the security deposit to like pay for other bills. And so if they are a property management partner, they actually don't hold any of those funds. They send the rent directly to you. They just take their management fee on the platform. And so we've designed it that if you are a property management partner, we are not having them hold your funds because of those types of just really sketchy situations we've seen on other platforms. So that is a really good point because it comes up actually more often than you'd think where they tap into the owner's funds to pay things. And I don't know why property managers do that, but I've heard it too much on other platforms. Yeah.
Recently, I've had several conversations with people where they talk about their experience with their property manager, and they're usually 2 or 3 months into something that would have freaked me out in weeks, let alone months. My
Mm-hmm.
brother caught his property manager, who he's since fired, basically rent increases that were never reported, so they were keeping the difference. When they got caught, the property
Wow.
management company said, "Oh, it's just a mistake. Here's all your money. We'll give you a year free service." So they were like, they knew that with like literal data of this was the rent payments, this was the rent taken out, that they were had. And sure, maybe it was a clerical error, but it just seems to be too common.
Yeah.
REI Jared, who does co-living, says payment plans are in part why I do week-to-week rent payments. So yeah, that makes sense
Mm,
too.
yeah.
And Jared says, Dana, I think at the one rental at a time in Vegas, you said you do rent by room. I set up a meeting, but you and your team had a major loss. So that didn't follow back up. I remember that. I need to reach out to you guys again. So you
Oh,
guys can
yeah,
set that
that
up.
was, sorry if the loss was, Brandon. So our, head of sales and marketing passed away battling cancer, and it was actually sudden. So if that's the loss you're talking about, I'm sorry. I think we probably had the memorial, that day, but we'd love to chat with you.
Jeff Jones has 12 single family house rentals, first 10 in personal name for landlord insurance, having trouble with recent two from DSCR closed in LLC. Which insurance carriers have you seen used for 10 plus rentals? Thank you.
Oh gosh, well, it totally is dependent on your state. I mean, especially like if you're in California and Florida, there's very few insurance providers you can go through, let me tell you. So it depends on what state you're in. And then there's obviously the landlord insurance providers. So I think there's Steadily and Obi are the two that do landlord insurance. You can check those. We're not affiliated with them at all, but I do love their teams. You get quotes from them. My properties are in Florida, so I can't actually get insurance on them through those providers. But yeah, I would go ahead and check with those two providers first, see what they can do for you. But I would also get local quotes and just understand from even the person you purchased the property from, if they have any recommendations in that area, get as many quotes as possible. The other thing I would say is the devil's in the details. I think a lot of people just look at what is the cheapest, the most affordable quote. And that's not necessarily always the way to go. Really understand, what are you covered for? Does this include flood insurance? Go to the FEMA map, check flood zones, especially after what happened in Texas. Check what flood zones are. Although they say that if you're not in a high risk flood zone, one in every three insurance claims still comes from places that are not flood zones, like flood claims. But definitely look at the details of what is and what isn't covered in the policies, what the deductible is, all of that. And then keep a list of all of the providers, because every year when the insurance claims go up, you're going to want to go ahead and check with multiple providers to see what you can get.
One of the sponsors of the One Rental at a Time daily financial news is Steadily. And I think if you,
Yeah,
when you reach
great.
out to them, mention One Rental at a Time, I'm not sure what the discount is. I think Zuber negotiated something out of them. Hopefully it works in your state. I So the local investor groups is always a pretty good resource, but I would probably go to the Bigger Pockets forums at biggerpockets.com and put up a
Hmm.
chat. Be a little specific. I live in this county, in this state. I'm looking for insurance, and be, as much detail as you put into your question. This is for properties owned in an LLC with the DSCR loan. Suggestions, please. And yeah, I think you get more professionals on there than you do in like social media groups.
Great.
Julie Anderson says, my assessor just raised my 11 unit from 19,000 to 23,000. I think we're going to see a lot more of that in Washington because of the new
Mm,
bill that passed where it raised the allowable limit from 1% of property value to 3% of property value. That
yeah.
doesn't mean taxes are going to triple. It means they've got a lot more of a window to use there. Chester has a question for Dana. Do you have data on how many investors are self-managing remotely using Hemlane? If so, do you have either raw numbers? And then there's another question. I'll let you start with that one first. How many are self-managing remotely with Hemlane?
Yeah, good question. Majority are, well, it depends on what you define as remotely managing. So majority on essential or complete packages. So our higher packages or using like our tenant placement services are on are remote from their property. When I say remote, I'm talking about an hour plus away. It doesn't have to necessarily be a flight. It just has to be, I don't have the convenience to go there every day, drop by the property. And I think that that is something that people ask about, like, well, what about how do you define remote? Does it have to be out of state? And what we've found is it's just, you can't stop by there after work to do a showing. And so that's the majority of those two. On the basic package or software only package, there's actually some people who remotely manage it. But then they have their own handyman, their own crew, et cetera, on the ground as well.
And the second follow-up to the question is actually, so for the people who manage self-managed remotely, which is the most common tier that they use as landlords of the Hemlane platform?
Definitely the complete tier that they'll use if they're remote. And part of the reason for that, I think one is having that service professional network, other people to tap into. But I think the other thing is also just when you get a rental assistant and other folks on the platform, it adds a layer of professionalism. Because if the tenant knows you're an out-of-state landlord and there's no one else involved in it, they might just be like, hey, this is an out-of-state landlord I can take advantage of, versus being like, oh, they've got a pretty professional process in place. I always recommend you don't have to tell them where you live. You don't have to tell them anything. Even if you want to meet with them on a Zoom call after we find the tenant and they get approved, which I highly recommend, you can just say, hey, I'm pretty busy. I may drop by the property here or there, but just want to get to know you, see if you have any questions. Know you use the self-guided tours, blah, 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 blah. Can we review the lease? Do all these terms make sense? All of that. And I find that that kind of adds this extra layer, but they don't need to know where you live or anything like that.
Love it. RA Jared, this question for me. I recently bought a house as an owner occupied. There is a building out back with power, AC, but no water. If I live in the building and had a toothbrush in it, even without water, would that count? Sounds like you've talked to the cops a few times. A toothbrush establishes residency. That's used in almost every DV case that I've ever gone to. Uh, so here's the thing, Jared, and sometimes I hesitate to say things like this on YouTube because there's always some keyboard warrior who comes at me and says, but, nobody cares where you live. When you do an owner occupied loan, that what it is a time delay device. You can't use another one for 12 months. I've got friends who purchased an RV, buy a house, live in the RV on the property, rent the house out. Short term, midterm, whatever they want to do, it doesn't matter. They're living on the property. So, is the shed livable space? I wouldn't rent it out. You get caught with somebody living in non-livable space, you have to give them all their rent back. Uh, but where you live, no one's going to check. No one cares. You just can't get a loan for another 12 months that's owner occupied. If you stay there, yes, put an RV. Doesn't even have to be the shed. Jaspreet Singh used owner occupied and lived in the hallway. Literally pulled out a mattress at night, put his mattress away during the day. Uh, yeah, it's a good question, right? As long as you intend to live there, it doesn't matter how you live on the property. How do I join the members only from Pewmeister? So sometimes it won't show up on your device. The members only, you have to go to a laptop or a computer or maybe a different, I don't know if it's Android or iPhone, whichever one doesn't work. There's a join button and we do it twice a month. It's at least a 45-minute call where we break down all of the aspects of a deal being good or bad, usually deals that someone brings. We all jump on Zoom together, so it's not just me talking to the camera. It's all of us on Zoom going over that deal. And once you go, every single previous members only is there, so you can binge watch them all because it's very expensive. It costs like $2.99 a month, $2.99 a month. I put that there to keep the haters out. But if you can spend $2.99, it's not so I can make money. It's to keep the haters out of the Zoom calls. 1 month of that, you definitely learn the skill. Spencer, as a follow-up for the break-even deal, it's your ideal property, laundry, fence charge, laundry, parking, not living there, break even, 9% cash on cash, 20% down to 5%. Shenanigans part of it. There you go. So yeah, as long as you've looked at all of those other things. Now, how do those numbers compare to the other properties in your market? That's what tells you if the math is good or bad. David says, it's hard to find a property for sale with good math in the Houston area. It only has a profit if it is paid off, but then the yield tanks. Would you rather recommend looking in unfamiliar area? So hard to find a cash flowing deal in his market. Would you go to a market?
I say do a ton of your research on it. So yes, obviously look at other markets. I like to be very objective with it. And by being objective, I have to get organized. So I start with a Google spreadsheet. And what I do there is I look up what are all the cities. And then I say, what was the population growth? What are the jobs and industries there? I always look for obviously Fed Ed and Med, like some sort of, it's not just one industry. If it's like one mining town, that's great. But if the mine closes down, all the jobs are gone and something could happen. So I look for some sort of stability where there's various different jobs there, not just one job market. I'm also looking then at what are the rental rates, purchase to rent ratios, gross rent multipliers, like all these kind of standard things. And I put all of these together. What I found actually with a lot of real estate investors is they'll do that. And if two markets look kind of similar, but you have some sort of connection to one market, like maybe you travel there because you have a cousin there who's twice removed or something, you might actually decide to choose that market over another one that's similar to it if they both look good. And then the more important part is know the neighborhoods, know everything on there, be I'm doing the work, as Zuber says, of constantly going on, checking the properties over time, seeing what deals are, because then you know when to pounce on a good deal. And markets change over time. So what I would say is just make sure when you're looking at these markets and going through it, in 2 to 3 years, market may look much different than it does today. So always keep that pulse on it. And then I try to say, like, don't try to buy one property in 5 different places. Once you find a market, get 3 or 4 in the same market before it was even considering another market. Don't go too far because, you know, relationships and building up those relationships with insurance providers and everything else that we spoke about is really going to get you far as well. And you could have someone drive by 3 properties at once and save you some money. So, yeah, I definitely think that if the numbers aren't working and penciling out where you are, definitely look in other markets. But be very objective with it, not emotional, and put together your spreadsheet of here's all the numbers, here's the objective things about what's happening with the city, is it growing, et cetera, and then go from there.
So, David, I'm going to give you two things that shifted in my market. And then if I did go to a new market, the two things that I would do before doing that. So, for about a decade, I invested and speed was my best friend. I wanted to get an offer in really quick. I wanted to get on the seller's radar before they got all of the offers they were going to get. And in over half of my portfolio, I was outbid by someone else. And then I sent a follow-up email saying my offer still stands. If that, congratulations on the better offer. If it falls through, my offer is in second position. Because a lot of times people make a very strong offer, all cash or much high above asking, so they can beat the seller up on concessions or negotiations once they're under contract. And so if you're sitting there in second position, that was my goal. Well, that kind of stopped working after 2020. And in 2021, what I did is I changed two things. The first one is I started watching days on market, and instead of trying to be the first offer that they see to be on their radar, I didn't start looking at properties until they sat on the market for at least 3 times what was normal. So, and in Washington State, in my market, properties are on the MLS for an average of 6 to 9 days. So I set up searches for over 30 days. And then I had some agent tell me that at their brokerage, they list properties for 90 days. So if anything's on 91 days, it means it's been relisted. Even more desperate. So I changed my criteria and I started looking for over 90 days, figuring that the longer it sat, the more desperate the seller would be, the more likely a low offer would make sense. So the last one that I purchased was listed for 500,000. It was on the market 147 days. I offered 400. We went back and forth for 2 months. They offered 477. I said 4. 444. I said 4. 422. I said 4. And then I backed out. And then they reached out and said, we'll take 4. Because it had been listed so long, I knew I had all of the power. The other thing that I did, so the first thing is I started watching days on market instead of being fast. The second thing is because of remote work, I expanded my market out. And I started looking about 35 to 45 minutes farther out than I was before. Because like Dana said earlier, if somebody has to work, if they don't have to work in the office at all, they can move to Thailand and be the richest person in their area. If they have to go to the office once or twice a week, they can live further out and deal with that commute once or twice instead of 5 days. So I found places where rents pushed up. So if you're in the area where you can't find the deals, go out a little bit farther. Remote workers have pushed up rents, but not prices because they might not want to buy because if they can call back to their office, not everybody wants to be a landlord and they don't want to commute that far every day. So you might find deals that make sense. So what I did is those two things. Days on market, expand the market out further. Then I put a timeline on it. So these are the two things I would do before I go to another market. The first thing is I told myself I'll give it a year. So in 2022, I said 12 months. If I haven't found the next deal in a year, then I'm going to go to a new market. And in July of 2023, I closed on my last duplex. I'll be buying another one here soon. I'll probably do the same thing. I'll give myself a year in these new markets with this days on market strategy. That's the first thing if I was going to go to a new market, if I didn't find anything in a year. The second thing is I don't want to invest in a market where I don't have there's one thing I have to have. I don't care too much about the math. I want to find a deal that beats the other ones. I don't care too much about the neighborhoods. I want it to be fairly safe, right? But there's safe and unsafe neighborhoods everywhere. What mattered to me the most was trusted boots on the ground. Either I used to live there or I have a friend who's probably going to come to my funeral kind of friendship that lives in the area who's somehow related to real estate, an investor, an agent, something, a contractor. What I had is Millennial Mike. He watched Mark Madsky get to 25 rentals in Gary, Indiana, watched him for years and said, oh, he hasn't fallen on his face. So Mike started investing in Gary, Indiana. If I was going to go at a distance, I would step on Mike's coattails and use his systems that he has in place. So even though he's not there, he would be my trusted boots on the ground. He's got the property managers, the contractors, the relationships with the cities, all of the things that I would need to be in another market. Gary, Indiana is not the best market in the country, but I would have trusted boots on the ground there. And that's where I would have went if I didn't find in my market after expanding out my market and watching days on market. Chester says, speaking of looking at different markets, reminds me of Bright Investor. Dana, my integration possibly with Hemlane and Bright Investor. These are two fantastic
Oh
platforms.
yeah.
I've not heard of Bright Investor.
Yeah. So Great Investor, Donato's company, I believe that's the one that basically helps you with finding properties. So they do analysis and stuff like that. There should be an integration. I have to check in with them where Hemlane is there and their preferred property management partner. I don't know where that is in queue, but I think that's something they're working on right now.
Nice. So it's something for me to research.
Yeah.
REI Jared asks if there is small multifamily available in the Houston area because single family also doesn't work where I'm at. In a decade, I've not seen one single family house that would make sense as a rental. Uh, but small multifamily houses with ADUs have. Jared's because I wasn't gonna pick on Frank, but when you said don't buy five houses in five markets, focus on one and buy a few. I was gonna say we call that the Frank and Cynthia method because they've got
That's what they
houses
did.
in so many different markets. It's a very specific thing that they're doing. They're doing it well. They have the bandwidth for it. Uh, NV, Vivek here. Howdy. As remote work is becoming more common, is there a resource to check for how many remote jobs are in a market to see if people having a job in the area is indeed increasing? No. No one
They're
has the
remote.
data. The census report doesn't have the data. The IRS doesn't have the data. Nobody knows where everybody lives. This remote work thing is a game changer. And it's what throws off. And this is why I've got a video called The Affordability Index is Broken. You cannot, there is not a source of accurate data that says where people live with remote work because let's say you picked Chicago. How many remote jobs are there in Chicago, in the entire city of Chicago, right? Do you know that that's impacting Gary, Indiana, because it's 45 minutes away? What would make you think to cross state lines? Like, there's so much nuanced detail there that nobody has the information. An affordability index says the median income and the median home price. This is how likely the average person is to be able to buy a house. Well, nobody knows how much people are making. This is why home prices continue to go up when people say it's unaffordable, because it's unaffordable for people who live there, who make the jobs that are there. But now you take out the people who go to the office once or twice a week, add the fully remote people or the one fully remote spouse, and now you can move almost anywhere in the country. So I wish there was an easy way to say, oh yeah, you just go to this website. Like Cody Davis would probably say, oh, this is the website I would use to find that out. But not even the IRS right now knows who's making what and who lives where. So I think the person who solves that problem somehow is going to be wealthy. Chester says, exactly. The one who has the power to walk away from the negotiation has the upper hand. There you go. Uh, Frank says, donate. I can't see. Donato was a great guest and did a presentation on Old Guy Wednesday accountability call. Great platform.
Oh, cool.
Donato. Have you heard of that?
That's Bright Investor. Sorry,
Oh,
I
that's
think
Bright Investor.
that's
Okay.
yeah, that's Bright Investor. Yeah.
Frank said he's also looking at Pittsburgh now because he needs a new market. Nice. Howdy, Larry. Okay, it looks like we're pretty much caught up on the questions. We'll give a few more minutes to see if anybody has any more. What is the
Yeah, I
next?
have one.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I have one about the remote work that I find interesting. I would also look at high cost areas where there's a lot of people who live there and work there. Like, for example, in the Bay Area, I'm seeing that the big tech companies are actually letting go of a lot of people, and they're using the excuse of you've got to come back 5 days a week or whatever, or find a new job. And it's basically their way to go and like find someone who's remote work outside the city or somewhere else for certain jobs. So that's actually another trend that I see where I'm bullish on like the Bay Area due to AI. But otherwise, I think I'd be very skeptical on a lot of things with it just because of the remote works. They can get someone in South Carolina and have them perform just as well. And so something to keep in mind also when you kind of look at trends is where are places that traditionally had a big job market but were really expensive, and potentially how do they get impacted?
Yeah, the high cost of living versus low cost of living is a pretty solid argument to make. I
Mhm.
think Millennial Mike does better in the low cost of living area as far as investing because of the number of transactions he makes. And I think it's something to do with he's 20 years younger than me and he likes to be doing something closing on something every couple of months. I want a small portfolio which comes from having that higher cost of living area. So understanding what's changing with companies letting people go or calling people back to the office in a higher cost of living area can be a powerful tool. See, there's two questions here. One's talking about LoopNet is good because that's a little more commercial. Spencer asks, what is the difference between YouTube membership and the course on the site? Well, the membership is just 2 calls a month where we 45 minutes, we specifically look at a deal. That's pretty much it. The course is, and I'm very transparent in this, everything that's in my course is available on YouTube. It's in thousands of videos. Some of these videos are 2 or 3 hours long, and there's a 5 minute section in the middle of one of those that was the thing that answers your biggest problem. I don't know what your biggest problem was, but that's where the information was. The course, it's all filtered down to actionable. This is what you do in this order. This is what you do when you get to tenant screening. This is what you get to all of these things. And every other month, we do 1 call a week, like tonight, where we get on Zoom. And sometimes we have a guest. We've had that ADU guy, Zuber, the lumberjack landlord, Cody, that comes in and you get an hour on Zoom, all of us on Zoom together, over whatever's actually in your portfolio today, not the hypotheticals of how do you find a market, but like in your market, let's look at your problem and solve it. Every other month we do that. So we have a month where we don't do anything, and then we have a month where we have a call once a week. I try to move them around. Sometimes we do them on Tuesdays. Sometimes we move them to the other part of the week. The members only is just to learn a skill. And the course is you get my cell, you get me, you get us in the Zoom. Every other month we're working on your stuff to get you to financial freedom sooner. But everything in the course is on YouTube. Don't spend the money unless you want to consolidate all the information down to just what you need to get it done. Um, Larry says, Dana, can you talk some more of how a landlord or investor can work with Hemlane as an agent?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you want to be one of our agents, you do have to be licensed. Unless you're in the state of, there's like 2 or 3 states that you don't need a license to make decisions on behalf of owners. Idaho's one of them. I'll have to remember what the other ones are. But otherwise, you do need a license. If you're under a broker, you just need their approval that you can be one of the agents on Hemlane. And what a local agent does is they'll show the rental property. They will, help answer all the tenants' questions, draft the lease, do all that kind of stuff for you. And then we also have brokerage partners where they can help operate the day to day, especially if it's a larger portfolio. We've taken on like 150 units. The broker on the ground will be driving by all the units, doing all of that kind of stuff for us. But with that, what we do is we get to learn you and get to know you a lot more. The first times we're introducing you to landlords on the platform, we're really involved just to make sure everything goes smoothly, that there's 5-star service, all of that. And we really just want to get to know you a bit more. What's your background in rentals? How much experience do you have? How do you deal with different difficult situations? How much do you know about fair housing? All of that, because we've seen people who come in who have a real estate license and they don't know a single thing about rental properties. And so we really look for our local agents to be really those experienced and subject matter experts in those local regions. Yeah. But we love agents, especially from the network. It's free for you to join our local agent network. And then whatever you charge, you get 100% of. We do not take a cut of it. And part of the reason for that is we're looking to partner with the best local support. It's very similar to our service professionals, like our vendor network. We don't take a percentage of the repair bills. And the reason for that is because we want to work with the best vendors. We want to work with the best agents, not the ones who are going to pay us the most.
I love that. Uh, I guess I was always curious, but never asked the agents that go out and do showing or lease signing or whatever. How do
Yeah.
you find them? And there we go. Uh, Oliver,
Yeah,
would-
a lot of them, oh, sorry, a lot of them are using Hemlane and they just say, hey, I'll fill out an agent profile. And we're like, wow, they have 50 properties on Hemlane and 100% rent collection and really good tenant placement. And we can look at their metrics on Hemlane and be like, they're really freaking good. They respond to tenants within an hour. And, that the data in the system can help too. So sorry to interrupt, but yeah.
no, you're good. So it's like Curtis, um, house hacking, several units, years of experience. I would be happier if Curtis was a Hemlane agent going out to do a lease signing with a tenant than if it was a real estate agent who's never owned a rental. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
that's huge. So I love it. Oliver says, would you offer your tenant on lease renewal 1 or 2 year lease options? Does Hemlane offer a tenant choices to tenants?
Yeah, you can put those in the system where you have multiple different choices, like check a box. I always say you should. You should be like, hey, a 1 year is going to be at this price, a 2 years locked in at a higher price, or sorry, a lower price than what the 1 year is, or a month to month is much higher. Give them the options, and then they're most likely to sign for a longer period of time because you're giving them some sort of discount. I hate when, like, if I'm a tenant and my only option is this new one price or move out, I'm like, F you, why did you increase it by so much? But if I see it compared to another, I'm like, oh, actually, that price is lower than the other one. I'm getting a good deal. Let me take the good deal one. So I think that it's actually really smart for you to do that. And we highly encourage doing that because people don't focus on retention enough. They're always focused on finding and placing a tenant, but you want to keep your tenants in your properties. And so I think that's a good idea. And then of course with Dion, his binder strategy, don't know if you've trademarked that, but you should. The binder strategy is also should be added, incorporated into the lease renewals.
It is trademarked. The course is trademarked. There's a book that's trademarked. The cool thing with the book is the trademark happens automatically at print. So,
Mm,
but the course, I had actually paid to have it trademarked. And I
okay.
put the course out for free. So it wasn't like I was saying, "Hey, I'm the only one that can make money on this." Uh, I want this out there for free to help tenants and landlords. And being trademarked, no one else can come out there with a course created after mine and go, "You have to take yours down because we're making money off of it." And that's why I really
Mhm.
did that. With me, Oliver, I'm the lazy landlord. I don't like tenant turnover. I prefer to have the longest lease possible. And with the binder, I'll usually do 1 year lease renewals. And towards the end of it, I'll say, since this is, a significant increase, if you would like, we can make it a 2 year lease so that next year the rent can't go up. So I haven't done the present, here's a price for 1 year, here's a price for 2 years, because it's a conversation where the tenant's picking the new rent. But I've had probably 80% of the time, the tenant will say, oh, 2 years would be great. And then you have to know your state. In Washington state, lease longer than 12 months, the tenant signature has to be notarized. 12 months or less, it doesn't have to be. So know what you're doing. I have notary available for all of mine because I have some tenants who have a cosigner. And anytime I use a cosigner on a lease, the cosigner's signature is notarized. So I prefer the 2 year lease. I've done 18-month. I've done year and a half because I try to get all my leases to end in December or January. Very specific reason why I do that. And sometimes I won't go with the standard 12-month. I'll do 14-month or 17-month, whatever gets me to December or January. Chris Webb says, hello from Central Virginia. I'm watching while grading papers. I might need somebody like Chris to send my book to have them grade it. Jason, Section 8 tenant has said she is moving out. Her move out date keeps changing because new property has not passed inspection. How can I have a move in for new tenant without eviction or kicking her out?
That always happens with Section 8. Those inspections take way too long to get scheduled, get pushed. It's actually one of my frustrations because even if you accept a Section 8 tenant, you're like, oh, great, we're 45 days out in some of these regions, which has been really frustrating, I think, for all owners who are like, great, another month of vacancy. So it depends on, I think, legally what you have in place. If you have a termination contract with her, can she move in with a friend? Can she move with a family? Like legally, if there's a termination date on there and she hasn't moved out since then that's where you'd want to do that. If you don't have a tenant already in place, you might want to be a little bit more flexible and just say, you know what, pay me month to month. It will be at an increased rate or something like that, to be flexible to her, and just make sure you tell her, reminder, leave the property in move-in ready condition. If I'm going to give you this month to month and be flexible with you, make sure that you go above and beyond with me upon move out. Because I think something like that versus really harshly, this was your date out and you're out of here and stuff like that, it doesn't leave the relationship well, and you can almost get more from it of really help me make sure that you can do X, Y, and Z. Also, that inspection date is usually 45 days away. So you might even tell her, hey, can you confirm the properties looks almost like in move-in ready condition right now? And can you help show the property? And we'll just give a date of, 30 days away for move-in or something where she's most likely going to be out by, because then she could help show the property or something like that. So I would be a little bit more flexible with it, especially given the situation where her hands are kind of tied with the inspection as well. And Section 8 tenants, you want to make sure they leave the property in really good condition. And so anything you can do there will be helpful.
Yeah, that's really challenging because you're not really dealing with a tenant who's janking you around. You're dealing with a tenant who's being yanked around by the Section 8 system.
Yeah.
I put a link in the chat that you can click on to register for the webinar for BiggerPockets on Thursday. Laura, actually, RA Jared says, do you get a CRE with the course? And I don't know if CRE is an acronym related to real estate because I'm a Marine, and a CRE for us is a crayon ready to eat. It's like an MRE, your meals that you get, but it's a crayon ready to eat. No, you don't get
Can't
that with
believe
the
you have that
course.
handy. I can't
Yeah,
believe you have that handy.
Marines have the blue crayons taste the best. You don't you just have to know that if you're around other service members. What you do get with the course right now is anybody who signs up gets a free one-on-one Zoom call, and then in a month you get another free call follow-up. So if somebody's looking at booking an hour, don't do that. Buy the course because it's about the same price. You get a free hour, and then in a month you get another free hour. Laura says, when Dana talks, I take notes. Dion, thanks for keep bringing Dana on. Great information from both of you. No, I appreciate it. I'm super happy Dana makes it possible for me to travel as a landlord and not be all
I
stressed
want
out
you
about
to
my
keep
portfolio.
I want you to keep traveling, Dion. Keep doing
That's the
that.
plan. Dana, what tier do you, I don't know that the CEO would have a tier. What tier of Himalayan do you manage your properties with?
Mine complete, of course.
Okay, there
I
you
use
go.
complete. I use literally every service. I'm like, I need eviction shield, I need this, I need that. And it's actually really cool. I think anyone who starts a company, you should dog food your own product, use it yourself. And that way you actually know what your customer's experience is. There's so many times we'll find something where I'm like, that was a little bit confusing to me. And it's really good to have that feedback and give it to the team. So I definitely use the complete tier and use everything with it.
Nice. Jared asks, does Hemlane provide weekend support?
Yes, it does. For repair coordination and obviously leasing, finding and placing a tenant, that is weekend support. For tech support, that's Monday through Friday, but there's always someone checking for emergencies on weekends. So for tech support, if there's something big that comes up or anything like that, there's always someone who is kind of in the background. But if it's a question that can wait till Monday, they'll just wait till Monday and answer it.
Sorry. Almost pushed the wrong button, which would end the stream. That would not be good. Love it when you just close out randomly without saying anything. Uh, Joshua, when you look at the leverage of a portfolio, when you consider a new property, do you consider the change in leverage the property adds across the portfolio or just down payment to cash flow?
Leverage of the property, what kind of leverage are they talking about?
So it's when you look at leverage at the portfolio level, when you consider a new property, do you
Are they
consider the
talking about
change?
debt, like
I think so,
mortgage?
yeah.
Are they talking about mortgage? Yeah, I would do it not at the portfolio level, but at the property level, because the more properties you have, the more those would impact your leverage ratio on the new one. So like, or sorry, less impact. So if you have more properties in your portfolio, every time you add one, it's less meaningful to the ratio. And so I would do everything at the property level. I always say the devil's in the details. You want to look at how the whole portfolio is doing, but then you want to drill down and say what has green, what is in red, etc. So I do all the analysis at the property level.
It's actually something that's been debated between Michael Zuber and myself.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
he he had a property on Norris Drive, his very first property. He did a
Yeah.
cash out refinance to buy two more, and the three of them were positive cash flow. But if you looked at Norris Drive, because of the leverage, it became an alligator where he lost money. And he says that he wouldn't do that again. And I don't add debt to an existing asset, so I don't do the cash out refinance or the HELOC or anything. So I would agree with him. I wouldn't do that either. But when I look at the loan to value of my portfolio, when I had one or two properties, I would probably look at each property. But what I'm doing now, after reaching financial independence and retiring early, I look at the whole portfolio because my next property, I'm probably going to use a VA loan. I'm probably going to be 100% levered because I'm too under levered.
Yeah.
In growth mode, I wanted 70% leverage, portfolio wide, right? And in retirement, I want 50% levered. I'm somewhere around 25 or 30% leverage. So I literally want twice the amount of leverage that I have. And that instead of adding debt to one of my other properties, if I use a VA loan to buy the next fourplex and it's 100% levered, that's the best interest rate I can get on the debt because it's owner occupied.
Mm-hmm.
That 100% leverage probably won't even bring me up to the 50% goal that I have as far as the whole portfolio goes. So with a larger portfolio later on in the investing career, whole portfolio. In the beginning, I would want to go to each property and make sure these are performing assets on their own.
I like that growth mode, Dion. You sound like a venture capitalist being like, grow at all costs. That's okay if you're in the red for that one. So I love it. I actually, I like that answer a lot.
Yeah, I call it the 70-50 rule.
Yeah.
70% in growth mode, 50% after. Chester asked if we could share your email, so I put it in the chat. It's dana at
Yeah.
hemlane.com. Chris says, Dana, I'm curious if you have seen any owners try to use AI and fail to complete something that is specific to a state or even a town.
Yeah, AI is not good for everything. It's given incorrect results on some tenant landlord law stuff that I've seen. It's not referencing something as recent. It keeps getting better. Don't get me wrong, it keeps getting better. Sometimes it will reference the wrong case law and certain things like that. I've also seen landlords use it where they're just not like AI is fantastic. I use it every freaking day, but you also need to use your brain a little bit and like the responses that AI have written, it's like, I can tell this is written by AI or something like that. And so when you're in a difficult conversation with tenants and stuff like that, you might ask AI, here's like 5 ways I'm going to think about this. What are 4 other ways or 5 other ways you would think about solving this problem or whatever, and really brainstorm. But at the end of the day, make sure you read it, make sure you look at it, make sure everything makes sense. Because you're right, I have caught where AI is not always right. And oh, actually a perfect example is fair housing and things like that. If you're saying like write a listing description, I've seen so many times it say things like great family neighborhood and things that would just get you into a lot of trouble. And so you definitely want to make sure that like your prompt says, I am writing a marketing listing description for a rental property in California where tenant landlord law is really crazy. Please write a listing description that is going to be completely accurate and very objective. And you know what I mean? And so I think there's certain things like that. I've also seen like if you do write a listing description, it might just be like, this is a cozy, comfy house. It's like, this is not a cozy, comfy house or whatever it is. And so, yeah, I've seen it be sometimes too creative with certain things. And so you just want to make sure that you yourself are set up for success and don't have any liabilities there.
Yeah, I'm thinking about making a video probably this weekend where I just share my screen. I go into AI and I say, hey, here's how I'm going to generate a landlord introduction letter. And I'm going to show you some of the flaws that it will do and how you can easily correct it. A lot of times when you ask a question, give me a list of these 10 things or these 5 things, it'll give you very biased information. And then you respond with, that is a biased response. Here's the other data that I found. AI has
Yeah.
no ego. AI goes, you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. Just call me out on that. That was a completely one-sided argument. Here's the more, unbiased answer. So I'm with Dana. You should be using it every day. If you're not using AI, you're missing out. You not using AI is not going to resist Skynet coming and taking over the world. And AI is not going to replace landlords, but landlords who use AI are going to.
Mhm. Yeah.
Jared has to get back Wolf Building Journey for the audiobook. Let's see if we get there. Uh, that's that thing that steals your life 1 hour at a time. This was great. Jared has to go to work. That's very sad. Dog fooding your own product. Nice. Somebody had never heard that. Oliver, I'm sorry if this was asked before. Never be sorry. We love repeat questions because somebody else is wondering too. And I wanted to check, does Hemline offer customer service phone support for tenants who have issues with the online portal for payments or maintenance?
Yes, absolutely. And it's if you're using our so any tech support, we'll talk to the tenants on the phone. We actually enjoy talking to them. We can talk to them and then as they're on their screen, they can give us permission to click for them to do this and that just while they're on a phone call and they're in our app. So there's really cool things that we can give them for that. But yeah, we offer phone support for that. And then they can also submit maintenance requests by calling us. Not all tenants are so tech enabled and some just want to call on the phone. We have a 96-year-old who uses Hemlane and he always calls just to tell us he paid his rent on the first of the month. And it's really cute. We love to get Peter's call every month. And so yeah, you're in good hands there. We do provide them support.
Joshua says that was the situation. They're currently at 11% leverage, so they're looking at adding. You're going to run into probably a lot of investors or people who want to be investors that go, why don't you just pay off the debt? Then you'll own the properties and you will lose asset protection from having a bank in first position, levered appreciation, levered depreciation, a ton of benefits. The last thing I want is paid off properties. 11% is half of what I am. So I would look at adding
Mhm.
as well, with knowing this much about your portfolio. Me in that position, I would be adding debt. I don't know that I would add debt to the existing asset. Michael Zuber and the lumberjack landlord both told me to take out a cash out refinance on my one paid off property, where I lost $1 million by paying it off. And I didn't. What I look at doing now is buying the next property more levered, 100%,
Mhm.
95%,
Yeah.
some owner occupied option. Chester says, how do late fees work on the platform? Is there one single fee, or is it based on the rules the owner sets? Due on the first, late on the fifth, $5 every day?
Yeah, you can do, you set it yourself. It's at the property level or the unit level. You can do one time, you can do daily. You can do its initial $100 followed by $5 per day afterwards. So there's all that flexibility with late fees for you to put in there. You just want to have your state and county rules, know them to make sure you're not charging too much on the late fees. And then on top of that, when the tenant pays if the late fee is generated, so let's just say it's on the 6th of the month, the tenant has to pay the late fee before they can pay the rent. The reason for that is they are late once and they will never be late again. They will realize, because otherwise they just pay the rent and never pay the late fee. Then they realize, shoot, I do need to always make sure I pay on time. So that's an added feature that I've never heard anything bad about. People have always really appreciated that feature.
Oliver asks, Dana and Dion, are you folks doing seasonal property maintenance, gutters, HVAC checks?
So I do it on my properties. It depends on the property itself, like, pest control, some need it, some don't, etc., like spraying the perimeter. So it depends on the property, but I always have some sort of seasonal maintenance with them. And let me think. Don't think there's any properties that I don't have that with, but it's heavily dependent on where your properties are located.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. You nailed it. It depends on the property. I have a property where I don't think I've ever done anything to the gutters because there's no trees close to it and there's nothing that gets in the gutters. I've got another property where once or twice a year, I have a gutter guy go out who also goes on the roof and clears the pine needles, because there's so many pine trees around this place, on the top of the vents. The pine needles will make like a bird's nest, which creates a pond on the roof, which will then leak into the roof. So once or twice a year. So depending on it, the HVAC stuff, and this is, don't follow this. I almost shouldn't say this. I don't maintain my HVAC systems because I want them to break. And this is from the Marine Corps. So I could say this now because what are they going to do? If you're in Desert Storm and you have a vehicle, a Humvee, where the transmission is going out and they won't replace it because it's going out, and you and your crew spend 4 hours trying to figure out how to flip this thing to destroy it so you can get a new Humvee with an actual transmission that works, you get a new Humvee that way. That's how I am with my HVAC systems. I don't want them to work because as soon as they require more than, say, $1,500 in work, I'm ripping them out and putting in cadet heaters. In my market, cadet heaters work better. They're more room specific. They need way less maintenance. They're cheaper. It's not worth ripping out a working HVAC system, but the second it needs it, it's out of there. So I'm down to two now that have HVAC in them, and I am looking forward to them breaking. So no, I don't maintain them. If you're in an area where it's normal to have them, I would probably follow the lumberjack landlord's advice in servicing them at least annually to save you money. My actual goal is like that Humvee. It breaks so I can get rid of it. Chester says, would tenants have to pay the whole amount when they pay the rent and then the late fee? That's what you said, right? Just they have to pay the whole amount and the late fee all at once to pay. They can't make partial payments.
They can pay only the late fee first and then the rent second, but they would have to pay the full amount for the late fee. For the rent, the default is full payment only. When you go through the process, you can select the option that says allow partial payment. Of course, in certain areas, like Dion, where you are and where I am, I would never recommend partial payments because if you allow them to pay part of rent, you can't send them an eviction notice. There's other places, like Jackson, Mississippi, where you can allow them to pay partial and you can still take them to court. So it's going to vary based on where you're located, but kind of as a rule of thumb, I always say full payments only. I prefer that regardless of where they are. Make sure they have the money in the bank.
There's another question from Christopher. Do you cap daily late fees at 5-day notice? I think this is specific to your market. You have to know what your rules are and what's current. So in Washington State, up at June this year, it changed to your rent can only be $20, and look up the law because I don't have this memorized, or like 10% of the late rent, whichever's less. So 20 is the maximum. It could be less if the late amount is less than that. Kris, to both of us, if you started today with your new understanding of leverage, would you leverage differently in your first, second, or how would you do it differently now than when you started?
Do you want me to answer that or do you want to
How
go
would you start
first?
today? How would you look at leverage specifically when you were starting today?
Um, That's an interesting one because I think today people are more levered than ever because of where interest rates are. So I always think back of like, I wish I would have purchased more properties 10 years ago. Right. I do think people are more levered today than they historically were, just because of where interest rates are. I'm not quite sure I would have done anything differently except purchase more rental properties, which I keep reminding myself of right now. But yeah, I don't think I would have changed too much there.
Well, that's one of the things I reference almost anytime I bring him up. But Cody, that's going to be in the course call here at 6 o'clock tonight. I interviewed him when he was 20, so he couldn't buy beer yet. He had 30 rentals, and he said, "Man, I wish I started sooner." Like
Yeah.
doesn't matter who you are, that's going to be the feeling. And I like the way you asked it, Kris, because normally when I get the question of if you could go back and do anything different, what would you change? That's what
Yeah.
most people ask. And the honest answer is nothing, because the end result was so amazing. Retiring at 52
Yeah.
with time freedom and doing whatever I want and going whatever, not worrying about money, no alarm clock, no boss, a small portfolio with the right amount of cash flow. I wouldn't risk the butterfly effect of changing anything in the past. So you asking, how would you do it if you started today? I would start with exactly the same idea, a 10-year plan, closing on one property every 2 years. Now, the income snowball would probably kick in around 5 to 6 years, and it would go faster just like it did the first time. But the first one would be a house hack. So if I was starting now, since I'm not currently working, I'd have to get a job in the field, work in it for 2 years, save a down payment. It would be an owner occupied purchase. Then, depending on how much I could save, the next one could be owner occupied. It could be a rental purchase. I would plan on every other year buying a property. I don't care what interest rates are. I don't care what prices are. I don't care about recessions impending. I don't care about crashes coming. I wouldn't try to buy it on the way down. I wouldn't try to buy low, sell high, none of that stuff. Buy a property every couple of years. As the cash flow stacked up, things would probably speed up, but it wouldn't be the plan, it would be the outcome. And in 10 years, I'd be financially free. Very simple. Starting today, if this is your first time finding this channel, today, you are in the graduating class of 2035. It could happen sooner, but if you make a 10-year plan, you'll stick with it. Fati, howdy. Hopefully see you in the course call tonight. Dana and everyone just got off work and trailing and alive, a little over an hour. Congrats finishing the book. Thank you. Yeah, book is ready. We'll see what
Yeah.
Zuber said. It looks great, but he's like me. We're not writers. We need an editor to look at it and go, have you met grammar? Joshua says, what is your view on taking partial rent payments? Take the money just in case or just move forward with eviction notice? I'll have an answer, but I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so again, I think partial rent and just collecting that is gonna always hurt you in the long run unless you can, there are certain states where you can serve eviction notices off partial rent. But if you can't do that, which is most states, you are just asking to constantly be a debt collector, constantly following up. If a tenant's behind this month and can't have someone else pay it, can't get the rental assistance programs this month, you better believe the next month, the next month, the next month, they're going to be behind. If they're going to get a job and it's 2 to 3 weeks, great. Have some family friend, have them get something, some sort of loan, something that says this is my number one priority. The second you let them get behind and take a partial payment, you've literally just told them that lease that we signed, that is a legally binding contract that we both agreed to, is no longer applicable. Because literally, I'm not going to follow the lease. And then suddenly late fees, it's like, will you waive the late fees? Will you do this? Will you do that? And if you just say, we really have to follow the document that we both signed, your life will suddenly get easier. This is where you get headaches, and this is when you want to get out of the industry because you make mistakes like that.
Accepting the late fee in places like Dana said, where your properties are and where my properties are, can extend the eviction situation. So no, I wouldn't take late fees, but I'm human. If I know someone's spouse passed away or their kid or their parent, uh, yeah, I'll be a little bit flexible with whatever's happening. But no, as a general rule, partial payments don't work. There's two things that I've done that in 10 years have made it to where I've never had a late or missing rent payment. My first year didn't go that way. Late became never. And when I went and talked to the guy to say, hey, why are you not paying rent? He didn't even live there. He had moved out and rented the house to someone else. So I didn't start
Yeah.
out doing this good. But the first thing I do is I let tenants know if the rent is going to be late, as a favor to you, this is a favor to the tenant. The day after the grace period, I'm serving you with eviction papers, period, no matter what. Because that lets you get access to some rental assistance programs who won't talk to you until you've been served. So I'm going to do that no matter what. This is even if a spouse passes away. Will I follow through and go to court? I don't know. But will I serve it so they can get assistance if they can? And will they know that that's the reason? Yes. The second thing is I have the explanation of the math of time, right? Tenants are sitting there looking at their cell phone bill. If I don't pay it, it gets turned off. If I don't pay for the car, it gets repossessed. If I don't pay for the house, maybe this person has a heart and they'll just let it slide. And I'll tell them, look, you can pay it late. Here's the late fees. You'll get the eviction thing. And if you catch up before it goes through court, you don't get evicted. But normally you have 4 weeks to get the rent together. So I call this the math of time. You have 4 weeks to get the rent together in most months. If you pay it 1 week late this month, that only gives you 3 weeks for next month. That'd be setting you up for failure. So have you thought that through? And I have this clear conversation, and the multiple times, sometimes the same tenant
Yeah.
every few years calls and says, hey, can I pay the rent late? We have this conversation, and then they pay it on time. So there you go. I think we are all caught up. Dana, thank you so much for hanging out with us. You are a mountain of
That
information
was
and you
so
help
fun.
everybody. So we will have to do this again.
Great, and I can't wait to read your book. I hope everybody gets a copy once the publisher editor go through it. I can't wait.
Yeah, I'm going to make an Audible, but I'm going to wait till editing is done because I don't want to have to go back and make changes. I'm not good at recording that tech stuff. That's going to be the biggest frustration. Writing it was probably going to be easier than recording it is going to be.
Yeah.
If anybody has questions for Dana, you can go to dana@hemlane.com, send an email, ask the same questions we brought today. Also, you'll be back in a few weeks and we will do this again.
Yeah, I can't wait. And mention Dion Talk when you come to me, because you do get 20% off your first year. So if you ever do want to use Hemlane, just make sure you have Dion, even if it's not this year, even if it's in 5 years, I just want to make sure that you get that coupon as well.
Nice. I put a link in the chat for the registration for the BiggerPockets webinar. Remember, if you want the code to get $100 off of BPCon, you have to register for that. Even if you don't show up, they'll send it to you. You get it afterwards. You guys have a day full of amazing, and we will see you next time.
Thanks so much, Dion.
I think we're off. There have been times where I go to shut it off and it goes